As the full moon rose on this Halloween night in the small town of Salem, the townspeople began to gather in the courtyard. A sense of doom and gloom had overcome the people of that community as they were aware of the horror that was about to unfold. For every Halloween night, 99 townspeople would need to be sacrificed to appease the spirits of the women who were put to death during the Salem witch trials. The townspeople knew that if they did not perform the ritual, then a suffering way worse than they had ever felt would befall them. As the full moon rose to its highest point in the sky, the town became alive with the spirits of the witches who wanted their annual sacrifice. For on this night, one by one the townspeople would be brought forward to stand trial in front of the Council of Witches, and the 99 purest souls amongst them would be chosen for a gruesome death, while the evil amongst the town would be saved. The method of death was no different than the witches had faced. They would be hung, burned at the stake, or tied up and drowned. As each member of the community was brought before the witches, their deepest, darkest thoughts and actions would be revealed to the other townspeople. This forced each member of the community to not only commit the most heinous acts throughout the year, but they were also forced to extremes to think of ways to outdo their neighbors. The bell in the clock tower struck 11 with a sickening thud. The witches cackled with delight as the townspeople of Salem were lined up to face their fate. As the first person was brought before the Council of Witches, a primal drumming and cheering began to cut through the silence. The witches would bang their hands against the tables to build the intensity of the moment and torture the individual one last time. It was Mrs. Johnson, a high school teacher, who was first to be brought before the council. All of Mrs. Johnson's deepest, darkest secrets were revealed to the other townspeople. It was revealed that she was the one responsible for numerous crimes and mischief throughout the community, including lighting her neighbors' farms and crops on fire. But for Mrs. Johnson, these acts came with a sorrow that would cost her her life. For this remorse, she was deemed pure and sentenced to death by fire. This caused the crowd of witches and humans to cheer with feverish roar as her poor soul was dragged away, horrifically screaming for mercy. As she was about to be burned at the stake, she apologized to the townspeople for all she had done. Her screams sent chills up everyone's spines as the flames slowly engulfed her body. The adults of the community were brought forward, each one being tried for their purity. One by one, they either passed or failed the test. Those who were pure were put to death and suffered a horrific fate like Mrs. Johnson, while those who were evil were saved. This continued until all the adults had been judged. But on this night, only 66 had been deemed to be pure and were put to death. They would still need 33 more for the ritual to be complete. The lead witch asked the crowd if anyone would be willing to sacrifice themselves for the rest of the community. Not one of the adults stepped forward. They all stood motionless, looking down at the ground, avoiding eye contact with the lead witch. The townspeople were forced to hate each other, so why would any of them do that? Everyone in attendance was stunned, both the townspeople and the witches. This had never happened before. They were always able to find enough adults to make up the 99 they needed during the trials. It was almost silent, but you could hear the whispers of everyone trying to guess what would happen next. Then the lead witch floated 10 feet above the crowd and spoke. She screamed with pure rage to the crowd, "Either you sacrifice yourself, or we will judge your children." The adults once again fell silent. She then let out one more loud scream and commanded the witches to line up the children of the town. Chaos broke out in the town. Everyone was trying to escape. Mothers grabbed their children, fathers grabbed their wives, and the adults all ran for the forest. They could hear the witches laughing as they ran away. Children were screaming and crying, trying to run, but this only delighted the witches even more as they could see the suffering the parents were going through also. This commotion did not last long. The witches were able to quickly bring the people back to the town square, and they lined up the children one by one to be judged. The first little girl was brought forward to the Council of Witches. It was Samantha Sanderson. She was only 7, blonde-haired, and very smart for her age. The witches began hitting their hands on tables again, increasing speed as the young girl was walked closer. Then the witches began chanting, burn her now." Samantha started to cry and pleaded with the council for mercy. She then looked at the crowd of adults, but they would only look away from her as she did. Even her parents were refusing to look at her when she needed them more than ever. The lead witch spoke with the little girl. She said, "Little girl, so cute and so pure, do you know why you are here today?" The little girl said yes. The witch cackled and said, "Well, this should be easy then." Samantha spoke softly, only saying the word "wait." Samantha asked the lead witch if they could volunteer 33 children to become witches and join them. The lead witch thought for only a second and said, "That is an interesting request, my dear. Let us discuss this." As the lead witch walked back to the table, the young girl spoke again. "Miss, for their only children to become witches, that would be a pain and suffering that you could never inflict on this town, as they despise you so." The witch looked back at her and said, "Oh yes, I know, my dear." After only a moment or two, the witch walked back to the young girl. She grabbed the young girl by the arm and flew up above the crowd once again. She announced that the witches would accept her deal on one condition, and that was that the adults of the town would have to choose the children to go. In exchange for this, they would release the town of the debt they owed to these witches and never return. The adults agreed. To the shock of all the children, the adults began choosing children without hesitation. Samantha was first, then 32 other children were chosen. As each was chosen, they would float up to the lead witch. Their eyes would glow red, and their faces winced in agony with a terrifying smile. The townspeople were morally broken from the years of torment the witches inflicted upon them. They just wanted this over. As the sun began to rise that November 1st, the witches began disappearing one by one with the children. And the witches were true to their word. They never did return to Salem again. But the monsters that these children became returned every night to torture the people of Salem in ways much worse than the witches could have ever dreamed.